Welcome everyone. I know some of you had reached out prior to this webinar starting about how stressed they were with the new changes and so many unanswered questions. And that's one of the reasons we decided to do this free webinar so that we could be here to maybe help spread a little bit more information, maybe help a little bit of stress and anxiety, and hopefully also help you figure out the next steps if you have been affected by the recent rule changes. Okay. I see we are pretty close to 100 people attending this webinar, which is good. I would love to know who the audience over here today is. That way we can make sure that we cater this webinar to your needs. So I'm going to launch the first poll, which is, where are you in the process at this time? So option 1 says, were you planning to apply to New York? Option 2 says you already applied to New York, but now you are waiting for your results. And then option 3 is you applied to New York and you already got an email from the board saying that you are rejected and that you need to do something in order to get licensed there. So let's give it like another 10 seconds and see where we are. Okay, I see most of the people have answered, and for transparency, I'm going to go ahead and share the results of the poll. So it looks like it's a pretty even split. More than 50% of our attendees were planning to apply to New York. Okay, about 43% applied and are waiting for the results, and about close to 10% have already received a message saying that they are not eligible. So, okay. With that in mind, let's have you go ahead and answer the second question. I promise this is the last poll that you will answer today. Why did you apply to New York? Did you hear that it was easy, but you were not really planning to move there? And then some of you said the second option is you heard it was easy and you were planning to move there. Okay, we'll give it another 5 seconds. All right, let me go ahead and stop the poll, and I will share the results again. So it looks like it's a 60-40 split. 60% of you heard it was easy and you were planning to move there, or maybe you are already in New York. And for the remaining 40%, you were going with New York just because it was easy, but you were not really planning to move to New York to begin with. So I think it's a pretty even split, I would say. Alrighty, well, let's get started with the webinar. The way the webinar is, we will talk about the recent changes and then whom does it affect. So if you're applying for initial licensure, what are the steps? If you're applying to New York via endorsement, then what are the steps? And then what we have done is we received a lot of queries on our fax email as well as our fax Instagram. So I've sort of combined the most commonly asked questions. So that way I'm going to go ahead and answer those questions at the end of the webinar. And then we'll leave a little bit of time to just go through some Q&A, which all of you can post in chat. So that way we can get your questions solved. Okay. All right, so these are some of the topics that we're going to talk about today. Start talking about the new rules. You may have heard already that on 25th of October is when all of the rules changed. Okay, these rules are a little bit more specific to people applying for physical therapy. These rules actually did not change for physical therapy assistant license. Okay, so if you're planning to go the PTA route, you should still be fine. You should still be easily eligible to take your PTA exam like you were previously. Okay, so PTA is still the same. Only if you're planning to apply via initial licensure for New York, the requirement now, even for foreign trained physical therapists, is that you must have a doctoral degree. Okay, you must have a doctoral degree or its equivalent. Okay, so that is a mandatory thing. Okay. Now, when you say equivalent, what exactly does that mean? The equivalent of a doctoral degree means you must have at least 7 years of full-time post-secondary education. And the definition of post-secondary means college level. You cannot consider 11th grade and 12th grade education into these 7 years. Okay, so it has to be 7 years. And then in addition to that, at least 3 years should be full-time at a graduate level, which will eventually lead to like a doctor of physical therapy. So those are your definition. That is your definition. This is where a very commonly asked question comes in. And I know we have a lot of our students from the Philippines who have a 4-year degree, right? So if you've done a 4-year degree, and then if you do a TDPT, which is 1-year degree, or if it is, a 16 credit TDPT, you're earning a DPT degree, so will that make you eligible? And the answer, unfortunately, is no, because 16 credit does not equal to full-time, right? About 30 credits approximately, okay? This definitely varies, and at the end of the day, the board makes the final decision, okay? So everything that we're sharing with you over here, remember, the board does have the right to make the final decision. So make sure you're keeping that in mind, okay? So yeah, if you have 4 years of education, and if you do like 16 credits of TDPT, that actually does not count to 7 years of education, because 16 credits of TDPT is technically not considered to be full-time. So make sure that you are remembering that when you are going through the licensing process, okay? Not only does the board state that you need to have a DPT degree or its equivalent, in addition to that, say for example, you've done your DPT degree or the equivalent and you're submitting your coursework. If you're looking at the courses that you're going to look at, these are the most common ones. Of course, it's a comprehensive list, okay? But make sure you definitely should have also completed the coursework in anatomy, physiology, neuroscience, kinesiology, pathology, right? Pediatrics, geriatrics, cardiopulmonary, pharmacology, integumentary system, right? All these are the common topics that are covered in physical therapy or physiotherapy schools, okay? So if you've earned a DPT degree, say even in your country, but maybe you did not study pediatrics, or maybe you did not study integumentary system, you will still be required to take additional coursework, okay? And this is just a continuous list of that, right? You have to have emergency procedures, psychosocial aspects in physical therapy, community health, administration. So all these are the courses that they are looking for in your physiotherapy or your DPT curriculum, okay? And also they look at clinical practice. So at least 800 hours of clinical practice is required. The good thing is most of the countries do have at least 800 hours of clinical education. So you shouldn't have to worry about that. But yeah, at least 800 hours of clinical education is required. Okay, so those are just some of the things that you will need. All right. Now, the question arises, what if you are somebody who's already licensed in another state and you are working on endorsing your license to New York, okay? The rules for that have actually not changed, okay? The rules for endorsing your license to New York, if you're endorsing your license to New York, ideally they say that you might not require a doctor of physical therapy degree. Of course, they consider this on a case-by-case basis. So if they feel like you don't have the relevant education or the experience, they can still require you to take it. But ideally, if you have adequate experience, then in that case, you may not need a doctoral degree if you're endorsing your license, okay? So for licensure endorsement to New York, you need at least 3 years of physical therapy practice in another state in New York. So say, for example, you were working as a physiotherapist in your country for 10 years, okay? And you're a licensed physio in your country, and now you're coming to the US. Those 10 years do not count, okay? But if you have worked in another state in the US for, like, say, even 3 years, right? Or 4 years. In that case, you do qualify to endorse your license to New York, okay? You do qualify to endorse your license to New York. And in that case, they will use the ECR or the FCCPT report, the educational credentials report that you have. They will basically use that as a reference. That's what the state board says, okay? It doesn't say that you have to be DPT equivalent. The thing is, most of the other states in this case need you to be DPT equivalent, right? but they don't require you to have a DPT degree. So if you're endorsing your license, it still shouldn't be a problem as long as you have at least 3 years of work experience. Now, what if you don't have 3 years of work experience? Okay, so if you don't have 3 years of work experience, in that case, the state board has said that you still have to go through the regular process. In that case, that means you will need a DPT degree, which is your 7 years of education. Okay. So you will have to meet all the requirements for initial licensure in New York if you don't have 3 years of work experience. Okay. And I've just added some steps for endorsement as well. If you feel like you qualify for endorsement and you want to actually, maybe you're planning to move to New York to start working there, right? And you're already licensed in another state. In that case, all you have to do is submit your application, your Form 1, pay the $294 fee. And then you will just submit your educational credential verification from an approved credentialing organization like FCCPT or IERF. Okay, so you will just submit that report to the state board, and then you should be fine. Of course, you have to transfer your exam scores to prove that you have passed the NPTE. But those are just some regular documents that you would have needed for any state. Okay, so it should be a little bit more straightforward if you're working on endorsing your license. Okay, they do require you to submit proof, okay, of your initial licensure in another state, okay, which is still active. And then the second thing is for you to prove that you've worked for at least 3 years in the last 7 years. They do require you to provide a list of supervisors who can verify that you have that specific work experience. Okay, in addition to that, you also have to submit a colleague verification, a verification of at least 3 years of license practice from a colleague who can say that, yes, this person worked with me, they are licensed in another state and they have the experience. Okay, but rest of the requirements, especially when you're endorsing your license, are pretty straightforward. So if you are, just remember this, because when we go to the Q&A section, we're going to come back to this information again, especially about licensure endorsement. Okay. Alrighty, so here's the biggest question, right? What do you do if you do get a rejection? Okay, based on the polls, it looks like most of you were planning but have not started already, and we'll talk about the steps for you. But it looks like a lot of you have already are waiting to hear back from New York State Board and are confused. What should you be doing? Okay, now especially if you applied on or after 25th of October, which is when the rules changed. And if you only have a bachelor's degree, there is a very high chance that you will probably hear back from the state board saying that you're not equivalent. The good thing about the email that the state board sends is they already tell you that, hey, this is why we've had students who've gotten accepted as well. Okay, so don't be dejected. Okay, we've worked with people who've gotten accepted as well. But if you are somebody who gets rejected and you're wondering why, the email that they will send you will most likely include the reason why you were rejected, and most likely they will also include information about what else is needed, okay, what else is needed for you to qualify for licensure. Okay, so that email does tend to be a good starting point. Okay, now if I were in your shoes, okay, and if I knew that I applied especially on or after 25th of October, and if I knew that I only had a bachelor's degree, I am pretty sure, I don't want to say in absolutes that 100% I will get a rejection, right? You always want to hope for the best, but there is a high chance that you will get a rejection, right? So in that case, you already want to start thinking about the next steps. And yes, there are other options out there. Okay, you may or may not like it, but there are other options out there. Okay, so with respect to what you should be doing in this case is, I think everybody essentially falls into two categories. Okay, for the people who've not started the process yet, and for the people who have started the process yet. And this is a flowchart that I would recommend. Okay, of course, this is more of a generic information. We have over 100 of you in the webinar right now. And obviously, what is the best path for you is going to vary for every single person, because every single person is from a different country, you have different work experience, and you have different educational background, right? So obviously it's going to differ, but in general, this is a guideline that you can follow, and then of course modify it based on your specific scenario. Okay, so if you are somebody who's not started the process yet, initial recommendation would be avoid applying to New York, especially if you know that you only have a bachelor's degree, or if you're in the middle of doing your master's degree but haven't really finished a master's degree, or if you did master's, about to complete 1 year TDPT, but it's still not equivalent to that 3-year credit or like, full-time TDPT, this thing. So there is a chance that you might get a deficit over there. In that case, my recommendation would be avoid applying to New York. Reason being, if you do your research well, there are other states as well which might be a better fit for you. Okay, and the reason I mention this is because based on your visa status, this might actually turn out to be a good thing for you in the long run, and we'll talk about why. Okay, but if you've not started the process yet, and based on knowing what the rules are and knowing what your education experience is, maybe just stay away from New York at this point. Okay, if you've started the process already, right, and say for example you've gotten a letter from New York saying that you're not eligible to practice in New York, in that case you have multiple different options. First one is you can either do the coursework that is required. Now, if you are doing the coursework that is required, it's not a bad idea, and this is not difficult for everybody. Say, for example, you are from the Philippines or you're from India and you already have a 5-year degree, okay? And then maybe you did a 1-year master's degree or 1.5-year master's degree or something, right? You already have close to 6 years of education, 5.5, 6 years of education. In this case, you will probably just need an additional TDPT degree and you will be all set, right? So in this case, you might be better off just doing your TDPT and going ahead with New York, right? But say, for example, you only have a bachelor's degree. Maybe it's like 4 years, maybe it's 5 years. And obviously the credits will vary for every country, right? There are some countries where you can do 5 years of degree and you only get 100 credits. And there are some places where you do 5-year degree and you get 200 credits. So of course, this will vary based on which country you are from, okay? But say for example, you only have a bachelor's degree and you know that it was a 4-year degree, you don't have enough credits. In that case, you instead of doing a TDPT, waiting for a year, you might actually be better off going with another state. Okay, so pay attention to what your situation is, because honestly, this process, what is in your best interest, really varies based on your education, what country you are from, and where you stand. Okay, so that's your first option. Okay, second option is go with PTA. Okay, I do understand one of the reasons why everybody is stressed is because I think there's a financial piece of it to it as well, right? Applying to other states means waiting longer, probably spending more money, probably having deficits and having to spend money on that, right? So there are a lot of potential expenses associated with changing a state, right? So if you feel like you're a student and you really need to start working, or even if you're not a student, but if you're worried about the financial piece of it, in that case, my recommendation would be at least go ahead with New York, apply for PTA, okay? That way, especially for the people who voted that they already live in New York, or that they already live in New York, or they were planning to start working, in that case, my recommendation would be go with the PTA, because this way, once you pass your PTA exam, at least you can start working as a PTA in New York, and you can at least start earning money while you are also working on either doing your DPT, or while you are also, working on getting your license in another state. Maybe it could be Maryland, it could be New Jersey, it could be any of the other states, right? So going with TDPT would be your next option, okay? And I see that there are questions in chat. I will be answering the questions in chat, but we'll get done with the content and then we will take questions at the end. Okay. So the second option would be TDPT. You can also do a combination of the first and second option. The second option was going with PTA. You can also do a combination of the two. So say you know that you're almost there. You just need a few extra credits to get your TDPT to make it 7 years of education. In that case, what you can do is, while you're doing your TDPT, finish your PTA, so that way you can start working, start earning money. Okay, going with PTA is recommended only if you are in New York. Okay, if you are sitting in California, or if you're sitting in Seattle, or if you're a student in Texas and you were actually not really planning to go to New York in the first place, you just applied to New York because your friends said and everybody on the internet said New York is the easiest state, and you were not planning to go there, you were just doing it to get your license. In that case, don't go via the New York route. Okay, PTA might not be worth it for you in that case. But for the people who live in New York and who were actually are planning to move there, or are there already, in that case, this would be a good choice for you. Okay. And then the next one is the third option in this case, if you've started the process already, is start applying to another state as well. Because like I mentioned, based on your educational background, there are a lot of surrounding states which are very, very, very student friendly. They're very, very, very foreign trained physiotherapist friendly. And they will, it's easier to get jobs in those states, and they don't have TOEFL requirements. They don't have supervised clinical practice requirements. There are a lot of states in the surrounding region which will allow you to work as a physio. Okay, so this is the third option. And again, depending on your visa status, you might actually be better off starting with another state already. Okay, and I will talk about that a little bit more. Okay, so that brings me to the next point, right? Is this rule bad for everybody? The answer is not really. I know that for a lot of us, yes, this is a tough decision and it's a tough news to swallow, right? Especially if you had everything planned, right? This is definitely a tough news to swallow, especially if you are already a US citizen or a green card holder and New York is your home state and you only have a bachelor's degree at this point. Yes, it is difficult, right? But if you are somebody who's on a student visa, if you're somebody who's planning on applying for H-1B, if you are somebody who's in another country, right, and you don't have any immigration status, right? You're not a green card holder, not a citizen, or if you were planning to apply for your healthcare worker certificate, this might be not that bad thing, because one of the things that I realized while working with students in the past so many years is what students would do is they would apply for New York, which was the easiest state, and they would get licensed, right? Oh, also, even if you're on EAD, right? But your goal is to have your own H-1B, right? Again, this might not be a bad thing, because what used to happen previously is students would apply to New York, they would get licensed, not realizing that they would still have to go through the CWT-6 evaluation process in order to get the healthcare worker certificate to start working. So what would happen is a lot of time people would get licensed, okay, and they would not realize they need the CWT-6 evaluation. Then they pay for the CWT-6 evaluation and then they get deficits. Now you have to do the deficits and then you have to apply for a re-evaluation. Then you get your healthcare worker certificate, okay. Then you apply for your H-1B. So especially people who are in other countries and who are just getting started with the process, right? New York definitely should not be your pick, okay? You are actually better off going with a state that does a CWT-6 evaluation, because when you do this CWT-6 evaluation, yes, you will have some deficits and yes, you may have to take some courses, okay? But now you already know what exactly is needed for healthcare worker certificate, okay? So when you apply for your healthcare worker certificate, you know exactly what courses need to be taken and you will not have to apply for a re-evaluation for your healthcare worker certificate, okay? So this might, I know it's not like a direct blessing, but I do feel like if you want to be positive about it, if you don't want to be disheartened about it, this is one way of looking at it, that now when you do your evaluation for another state, especially if it's a CWT-6 state, you are actually finding out ahead of time what is required for the healthcare worker certificate, and your healthcare worker certificate process should get a little bit easier and faster because you will know what to expect, okay? If you do the New York credentialing, you have zero idea what deficits to expect on your healthcare worker certificate, okay? But if you go with another state, you will have a much better idea, okay? So that's one positive way to look at it, okay? But yes, like I mentioned, if you're a US citizen or a green card holder residing in New York, this might not be the best news for you, but it is what it is, and that's when you look at neighboring states. I am going to take one question that was mentioned in chat. Before I proceed, somebody mentioned, how can I apply for New Jersey PTA? The answer is New Jersey does not allow foreign trained physical therapist to work as a physical therapy assistant. So you cannot apply for PTA in New Jersey. Okay. So this is what I was talking about, which is if you never intended, so this rule is not really bad for you, especially if you never intended to work in New York anyway. This is genuinely not a bad rule for you. Okay. I was just talking to somebody on one of our facts consultation calls the other day, and they were living in California and they went with New York because everybody said New York was easy, but they were never going to practice in New York. And that's when we had the conversation of, why do you even want to get licensed in New York? If you don't plan to work in New York, the only way New York licensure helps you is you can take the NPTE faster. But other than that, it really doesn't help you. Okay, so for those of you who were not planning to move to New York and you were going with New York just because everybody said it was easy, that's actually not the best advice. It doesn't really help you because you cannot work in another state even if you get licensed in New York. Okay, so if you weren't going to work in New York anyway, it really shouldn't matter to you. The next one is if you have H4 EAD and if you're in another state, again, this rule really should not affect you at all, because you would have, even if you go with another state, you will start working at the exact same time as you would have if you would have gone the New York route. Okay. And if you're applying for type 1 anyway, the good thing is at least you will know your type 1 requirements ahead of time. Okay, so I hope that this helps to create a little bit of positivity with respect to this rule, because I know like I mentioned, it's a tough pill to swallow, but we find out a solution whenever a challenge is thrown our way, right?